And let's see here. All right, here we go. And as more people come in, we'll add them. All right. All right, so welcome everyone. We're glad that you could come this evening to Adulting 101 Sewing Basics. And tonight we'll be, for our project, we'll be learning how to sew a drawstring bag. Our presenter this evening is Sydney Markham. I'm your facilitator. I'm Christy Buchanan-Wellman. And today we'll learn some basic hand sewing skills. And with those skills today, we'll learn how to create our own drawstring bag. This will be great to hold things such as sunglasses or other small items. We'll give you just a quick review of some Zoom recording info and features. You can mute your microphone whenever you're not speaking. Also, you can turn your video on and off. We do encourage folks to turn their video on. You don't necessarily have to show your face, but you can angle your camera down so that as you're working on your project, we can see your progress. And then if you need help or you would like feedback, we can help you. Also, there's the chat feature here. You can feel free to post questions via chat. And you can also share nonverbal feedback, such as raising a hand or other feedback that you see there. We are going to be recording this evening, just so that you're aware of that, just so that we can have it for folks that may not have had an opportunity to join us tonight and go back and practice if they wanted to practice again. This will be posted on the library's digital branch page and also on the YouTube channel. So if you are a crafty person and you enjoyed the class today, we also have a very nice upcoming program coming in June called Eco-Friendly Crafting on Birdhouses. And we'll be using repurposed materials, in this case, a milk carton to create a colorful birdhouse for your home. So if you enjoy doing things like that and repurposing materials instead of just throwing them away, we'd love to have you. That's going to be Wednesday, June 22nd at noon. And just sign up today if you're interested. And without further ado, thank you so much for your support today for the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library and for Independence Regional Library. And I will step out of the way so that Sydney can take over and show you how to do some wonderful basic sewing skills.
Thank you, Christy. So my name is Sydney. I'm a library aide over at Independence Regional, and I've been sewing for, I think I started hand sewing when I was about 8, so over 15 years, and sewing on the machine for about 12 years now. I prefer sewing on a machine because I like making clothing. But hand sewing is incredibly useful, and it's also much easier to teach other people because not everybody has a sewing machine. So if you picked up the kit, you should have a few items in it. First off is the fabric that will be actually turning into the drawstring bag. So this is what the finished product will look like. It is just big enough to make and to put like glasses in, and then it ties like that. And you should also have some scrap fabric, a needle, and your little sewing kit. So there is another needle in here, but it's very small and it's difficult to thread. So I recommend you use the larger one that was attached to the scrap fabric. For the first thing we're going to do is learn the back stitch. It's a very useful stitch, and it looks very similar to what you would see on the inside of your own clothing. I'm going to go ahead and show you the finished product and what it looks like on the inside. And then I'll go ahead and demonstrate the back stitch for you. And let's see, Christy included the directions and more information in the chat. So our back stitch looks like this on the what's considered the right side. It looks like small, it's really kind of hard to see. It almost looks like one continuous line, and there's a few smaller stitches on the wrong side. It's kind of doubled up, and that's what makes it a really strong stitch, and similar to that you would find on a machine, because it's pretty hard to pull apart. I mean, I've been sewing for a few years, of course, but I think this bag almost looks like it was something made on a sewing machine. So now I'm going to tilt my camera down just because it's the easiest way for you to see what I'm actually doing. If at any point you need me to hold something up or I've gone out of view, just let me know. I just have the laptop, so sometimes it's a little hard for me to see what you all see. I'm going to be using, I'll probably go with red thread so that it's really visible. When we're making our actual product, I recommend you choose one of the colors that matches. Again, I'll be using a color that kind of contrasts just so you can follow along more easily. So now with your small piece of scrap fabric, we're going to learn the back stitch. So choose any one of your fabric color or thread colors and unwind. It doesn't need to be the whole thing for this since we're practicing. I'd recommend, I'd say maybe 10 inches. So kind of like the width of your forearm. And scissors were not included, so if you need to grab some, feel free to do that now. So I have my red thread, it's about that long. And now for threading the actual needle, like I said, these, the eyes on the larger needle will be much easier to slip the thread through. You can do this one of two ways. You can either just take the freshly cut edge and place it through. Sometimes it works perfectly. I also like to take the thread, loop it, and then pull it taut with my needle, and then pinch it really closely so there's a tiny loop formed. And if you have fingernails, it makes it a little bit easier. And then with that little loop, you can push it through. So it's just that sometimes the split ends on the thread can prevent you from threading it easily, but it works. And now we need to tie a knot at the end. So some people, and sometimes you'll want to tie both ends together for the purposes of this stitch, just to make it a little bit cleaner and also to make our thread last longer. We'll just want to tie one of the ends. So usually you need about 2 to 3 knots. And if you can get them right in the same place, perfect. If not, ones that are close to each other will usually still work. One more. You really don't need more than 3 if you've got them all kind of in the same spot. And now it's a little bit hard to see, but it's large enough that it's kind of noticeable. And that's what you want, because it'll stop thread from pulling all the way through once we start with our stitches. So now if you'll grab your piece of scrap fabric, it doesn't matter which edge you start your stitches on because it's just practice. We are going to take the 2 pieces together and we're going to be sewing them together. Normally, like with our patterned fabric, you would make sure that you have the right sides or the pattern side together. since we're practicing and it's white fabric anyway, it does not matter. So with the back stitch, we're going to want to start our stitch actually about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And you're going to want to come up from the bottom. And the way I'm holding it, I'm working on the right edge of my fabric. So once you pull it up, the knot should catch. And then you're going to want to, I'm going to tilt this down a little more. There we go. And you're going to want to take that needle and go about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch over, not quite to the edge of the fabric, and trying to keep in a straight line if possible. So you're taking it down. And there is our first stitch. So as I said, it'll look, especially with practice, it looks pretty neat. And it looks very similar to the inside of your clothing.
Are we doing the stitch on the outside pattern or the inside pattern?
Are you practicing on the scrap fabric or do you have your?
Oh, we're just practicing. Okay.
Do you already know how to do the back stitch?
I kind of know how to sew, so.
Because that'll also, I was gonna say, if you're more of an intermediate sewer, then if you don't need to practice, then we can just skip to the actual sewing part. Would you like to practice or would you rather just skip to the project?
I think now that I'm threaded, I'd rather just dive in.
All right. Okay. Let me real quick.
If that's all right with y'all.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say it says beginner friendly, but since you are the only one here and your sewing skills are a little bit beyond the most beginner, you can skip that part.
I'll tell you what inspired me. Last weekend, I was going hiking and I had purchased a brand new pair of pants that had like a cord that you tighten. They were hiking pants, right? So they had like that, by the ankle, they had a cord and it snapped. So it was like one piece was attached and then there was the loop and then the other piece came out of the pant.
Mm-hmm.
So I stuck the cord. Now this is like a real like stretchy cord, right? So I stuck it back in the pants and I'm sitting there and I'm going, there's got to be a way that I could sew this in so it makes sense. And what I realized was that if I actually stick the needle into the actual cord, right where it was supposed to be a joint, yes, and then wrapped it, kind of like stitched it and reinforced it, and it worked perfectly. And I was like, wow, I got to go. So when I was at the library the other day and I saw the sewing thing, I was like, oh, I'm so inspired.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm always losing my sunglasses in the car. So I figured, I was like, this is an easy and practical project. The last one we did, we actually made pain cushions. Those were pretty fun.
And I literally like just recently, I said, I really need another eyeglass bag because I have some, but then I was like, I sworn I had another one, but I don't know where it is, but I could probably pick one up. And then, it was like, no way. Like, it was meant to be.
Timing. That's perfect. I love it. All right. I have my thread. I'm going with the yellow, so it'll be a little hard to see the stitches, but I'm not too worried because we're sewing in straight lines. So as long as you're following that, I marked a blue marker, you should be able to see. Let me go ahead and get this knotted.
All right, so now we're on the outside of the fabric.
We are, yes. So the way it was folded when it came in the bag with like more colorful, what we consider the right side of the fabric together, it'll stay that way until we're done and we flip it inside out. So we'll be sewing with the lighter side facing out, and we'll start.
Okay, so it is inside out because mine is mine is brighter on the inside.
Exactly, because then you flip it, it'll look you know, like the finished product. And then the stitches will be on the inside.
That's what I figure. Okay, good.
Yes. Okay, so now that we're starting, you'll want to start in the folded edge corner. And so, so the folded edge, and then we'll sew up along the bottom and up to the top. I marked, there's about a small 1/2 inch where there is no dotted line. We won't put any stitches there because that's going to be the hole that we thread our yarn through. But it'll take us a little while to get all the way up there, because when I practiced this, it actually took me about 35 to 40 minutes, which I think in our 1:15 we'll have no issue getting through. So I'm going to tilt my camera back down just so you can see what I'm doing. So again, with the back stitch, your initial stitch is coming up about 1/4 inch from the edge, and you want to get it along that light blue line that I marked. You're pulling up all the way, and then you're going back down close to the folded edge. It's the whole reason it is called the back stitch, because we're kind of backtracking. So instead of the running stitch where you're kind of going up and down, we're going up and back to make it even stronger. I recommend no more than 1/4 inch in between stitches. If you can get them smaller, awesome, because it'll be tighter. But you know, it's just a sunglass bag, so it's not going to see a lot of wear and tear, hopefully. I will recommend, since we're using the thread and it's a little bit longer than I like to work with, but it's also the perfect length to where we won't run out of it before we're finished sewing. Just making sure that when you pull all the way through, that you're not catching anything. And then when you go up on the wrong side, same thing, that you don't get a long knitted tail. It's probably the hardest part about back stitch once you get the hang of it. Looks like we have somebody else joining us.
So when you do the back stitch, you're kind of like going twice over.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you look, I was going to say, if you look at the back side of it or the wrong side, you'll see several layers of thread, which is what makes it such a strong hand stitch. It's useful if you ever have, like, you know, a seam on a shirt or pants splits open. This is the stitch that I would use to fix that, especially if you don't have a sewing machine handy.
Okay.
And I think we have Carissa joining us. So Carissa, we've already started on our bag. So if you picked up one of the kits from the library, you should have a few things in it. It should have a little white scrap of fabric, as well as the larger colorful piece. So it's folded in the way where the more colorful side is facing inwards. And there are some light blue markings to show you where we'll be stitching. So you can start sewing exactly the way it's folded in the bag. And this is what our finished product will look like. Little bag with our drawstring. And Carissa, I don't know if you have any experience hand sewing. We'll be using the back stitch for this one. I'm currently working on mine, so I'm going to tilt my camera down so you can see I'm using yellow thread, which might be a little bit hard to see. You have several different colors in your kit. I don't like the black thread because it frays really easily, but any of the other ones will be perfect for our purpose. I would just recommend you save either the yellow, green, or white for the outside where we'll have some stitches that are actually visible. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute. If you don't want your face on camera, no worries. You can always tilt it down so that I can actually see your work. But right now we are using the back stitch to sew along that blue dotted line on our fabric. And if you need any help or would like me to show any how to thread the needle, how to do a back stitch, please let me know. And when you get to that corner edge, I would say just make sure that your last stitch comes up kind of right at the end mark so that you can turn it for a nice clean edge. Okay, I'm coming to the corner of mine. Christine, how are you doing?
I was doing fine, and then I ran out of thread towards the
Yeah.
thing. So now I'm trying to tie it in a knot, and it's so small that I don't know if it'll be.
Do you have here? I can help with that.
Or I could just sew over that, right? And it'll stay.
You could. It would hold. I would just recommend going back about 3 stitches. Like that's exactly what you do on a sewing machine anyway. There is no knot. You just kind of go over the same spot several times.
Yeah, I'm not gonna have enough green, so I don't know if I should.
Since the fabric or since the thread will be on the inside, you could even use the red if you wanted, and it really won't show.
Oh, okay. All right,
I
good.
would say just make sure you save one of the colors that you would like to be visible. We'll do some stitching that'll be, you can see it when it's facing right side out.
Okay, perfect.
But thankfully the fabric that I ended up using really matches most of the threads in the pack. That was not even intentional.
Excuse me?
Yes.
I have a question. So I'm starting my sewing and I need to tie the knot at the end, but it's so small that's kind of hard to.
Yes. So if you want, one thing that will make it easier is tying the two ends together. I think it's easier to work with one thread at a time, but it is really hard to see that tiny little knot. So if you want, once you have your needle threaded, what you can do is take, were you able to get it threaded all right?
Yes.
Okay, so you can take both thread ends and make sure they're even. And then instead of just tying one tiny knot, you can tie them together like you would your shoes. You can just kind of loop them. And there's several different colors. So if you need to get a different thread at any point while we're sewing because you run out or it's just kind of difficult to work with, no worries. So you'll tie one little knot like that.
But does this look, oh, sorry. Is that kind of?
Oh yeah, that's looking good. That looks really good. And then once you have that initial knot tied, like I said, just like you're tying your shoes, we'll tie one more. And you can use as much thread on the ends as you want. I left just there about an inch on each end because it's much easier to actually work with.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And once you have that tied, you will be ready to start on your project. Let me know when you're ready and I'll kind of show you what direction we're sewing and what stitch we're sewing with. All right. So I'm now about an inch up the side. I've already gone across the bottom and up. We still have about 45 minutes left in the program. So I would say as long as you've started along that bottom row, we should have enough time to finish. I just want to make sure that I have enough time to show you how to do the top part, because that is, I think, the trickiest. So if you don't quite finish it tonight, no worries. I'll make sure that we get to being able to turn that down and show you how to actually thread the yarn and turn it inside out.
Where do I start sewing?
Okay, so when you're looking at your fabric, there should be the lighter side will be facing out, and then the more colorful sides are facing together.
Mm-hmm.
The way you want it. I folded it and ironed it just for you guys. And then you'll want to go down to the folded edge, and where you that light blue marking, that's where, yes, that's where you're going to start your first stitch. Let me go ahead. I'm going to thread another needle real quick and show you the back stitch so that you can kind of start going across the bottom there. Okay. So with the back stitch, you actually want to start about a quarter of an inch, like a tiny little bit away from the edge of that, the folded edge of the fabric. And you want to make sure that we are going along that blue line. So it'll look like this when you go up. Let's say you're starting your stitch right there. You'll hold the blue side, blue marker side facing up. And then you'll want to go, it's a little hard to show. You want to go like right there.
Mm-hmm.
Not far from the edge. Oops, hold through. And then you're going to go back over to the edge about as close as you can get. And you're going to bring that thread all the way through. So when you get your first stitch, it should look something like that. It's called the back stitch. So you're kind of going up and then going back instead of the running stitch we're kind of used to seeing, which is like just kind of going in and out.
Oh, I see.
And then, so when you go for your second stitch, you want to again put it like a quarter to an eighth of an inch along that blue line. And when you push it up, there'll be that gap between where that thread is.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see your other stitch. You want to get your needle about as close to that first stitch as possible, and then push it down.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So the more you do, it'll look like a nice straight line. Okay. I think one of the first things I ever sewed, my mom had those like fabric scraps, like chair fabric scraps. I don't know why, but she was a teacher, so she always had things like that. And then just spare buttons. So I made myself like a tiny little button pouch. I'm sure it's somewhere in the attic still, but now I've progressed to a little more advanced. I don't want to sew a quilt, but that's kind of a different skill set.
Sydney, do you want to angle your camera down to see the stitching?
Okay, so I am coming up on the part where we don't want any stitches. So in just a minute, I'll show you all how to tie a knot at the end. And Carissa, since you folded the thread in half, you'll probably have to rethread your needle about halfway through your stitching, because one length of the thread is just enough to get us up to that little like ½ inch mark where we won't have any stitches. And that will be so that we can thread our yarn and actually have a drawstring. So you can see there's that little bit where there was no stitching, but it still made a really nice finished edge. Okay. So when you get to, and I know you're both probably a little bit away from this, maybe you're coming up the side now, maybe you're almost to the corner, but once you get to this part, you'll want to, it's a little hard to see, I think I have the lightest marker on here, but right there, you'll want to stop your stitches. And so it's about 2 inches from the raw edge. And once you have your last stitch, you're going to want to turn your fabric over so that you're looking at the wrong side of your stitching. This is the one where you can see the back stitch kind of going over on itself. And you're going to want to take your needle and you're going to go under your last stitch, going under, and then pull through. And you're going to want to go under one more time. You're going to take your little bit of thread that you have left and loop it over that needle. So you're pulling your thread through the loop and it's knotting on itself. I usually do it twice just to make sure it's really sturdy. So again, going underneath that last stitch, pulling through, not quite all the way, making sure you have a little bit of a loop, taking that loop and going over the top of the needle. So it's better to stop stitching while you still have, I would say 3 or 4 inches of thread left. You have to make sure that it's longer than your needle because otherwise you won't be able to pass the loop over the needle. And once you have that, you can go ahead and cut your thread. And I'll pause for a minute and see where everybody's at. You want to show me what you got, if you have any questions. We've got quite a bit of time left on the program. I was sewing a little bit fast just to make sure that I'd have time to show you guys the final part, which is a little bit trickier than just doing the back stitch. It'll still be using the back stitch, but it just involves folding and folding again. Okay, let me see. Oh yeah, that looks good. Okay, so you're at the corner there and going up the edge. Yes, perfect. Yeah, they don't have to be right next to each other. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Mine is not. And they're a little bit larger than I would do if I was maybe fixing a hole in a clothing, because these will just keep your sunglasses or something small, pencil pouch, and it won't get like stretched the way pants or a shirt will. My needles are sticking to the magnetic laptop. That's kind of funny. So now I'm just going to stitch the rest of our long edge on the other side of that marking where we're not stitching. It's only about an inch. And then I think as long as we have 15 minutes to show you all how to stitch down the edge and make our little tunnel for our string, that'll be perfect. So either when you both are at that point or when we start to get closer to the end of the program, I'll go ahead and show that. Because it's not too difficult. It can just get a little bit fussy. This is definitely something that would be easier with if you have any extra pins or needles. It might make it easier to kind of pin fabric in place when we get to the top part. But it's also completely doable without those. It might just look a little bit less neat, which is okay. So now it's time for me to tie another knot and finish off this last stitch. So again, if you're wondering how to do this and want to watch, we're going to go on the back side. You can see it a lot better with the red thread, and where we can see those kind of overlapping stitches. You want to go to your last stitch and slip the needle underneath it and pull all the way through. You're going to do that again, and then this time you're going to pause with the needle about halfway through. We're going to take that extra thread, loop it over, and pull the needle the rest of the way through. So under, pause, put the thread over, and pull through. So it kind of knots itself. Much easier than trying to tie like a tiny little knot with your fingers. Like I said, that's why I always leave a few inches of thread at the end.
So I have a question. I'm at the part where the thing is, right? And there's a blue line that goes like to the edge.
Yes.
Am I supposed to sew on that or no?
No, that is just marking the area where we are not stitching at all. So it's that 1/2 inch.
Okay.
Continuing to sew just in a straight line on the other side of it.
So now I'm at the close, like now I'm doing what you just did at this point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So if you are already at that first blue line, you'll want to stop there and tie a knot at the back.
Do I need to reinforce the last stitch I did before I tie the knot on the back?
You can. It's definitely not a bad idea to do that.
Okay. So I just tell me if it looks kind of.
Oh yeah, that looks good. Yeah, your stitches are pretty neat. That looks good.
Okay.
Got it right, stopping at the perfect spot. Yes. Looks awesome, Christine. All right. And Carissa, how are you doing? If you don't mind sharing.
I'm doing good. I'm almost done with the long line going down.
Okay. Let me know when you're ready, and then we can do the top part together.
Okay.
Everyone's so focused on their project. So
Now,
quiet.
this is, I don't want to say the downside, but this is very different than the skills focused one, because
Right.
you really do need that time to just work on your project independently. So I'm here for support, but I really do the work. I'm taught like 2 things, and now we're just doing it together. Almost time.
I got to the part where it has like a line, like a crease. Well, not a crease, but this empty space. Yes,
Yes.
that part.
Okay.
What did I do there?
So that is where, did you stop kind of right where the line is? Mine's coming.
Yes.
Okay, so now you'll want to tie a knot. Let me show you another thread going here. So I'll show you how to tie the knot and what I think is the easiest way, especially on the back stitch. So if you have the what's considered the wrong side, where the stitches are kind of overlapping, you'll want to flip it over so that you're looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
Your needle and thread will be kind of coming up out of that since you just finished your last stitch. So your needle and you're just going to slip it underneath that last stitch. You're not going into the fabric at all. You're just slipping it under and catching the thread.
I see.
And then you can pull it all the way through. And then you're going to do the exact same thing again, catching the thread. This time you're going to pull it about halfway through. Grab some of that extra thread that you have. And then you'll loop that thread over the needle and pull the needle through that loop.
I see.
Something like that. And then you'll want to do that one more time to secure that knot. And then you can cut the rest of the thread off pretty close to where that knot is. And then you'll want to thread your needle again to do that last like inch above the blue marking. Thankfully, there's 5 different threads to choose from because I think you've probably had to rethread your needle at least once. And then we'll need at least one full length of thread for this last part where we'll turn it and kind of have our finished edge for our yarn to go through.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And as you're finishing up with that last inch of stitches along the long edge, you want to choose one color of thread that you want to be visible. So on our finished product, there'll be a line you can't really see on this fabric because I went with the green. So you can choose, I recommend the white, yellow, green, or if you're feeling wild and you want some contrast, you can do the red. But those three actually match the fabric pretty well, so it won't be very noticeable, which is nice because then when you mess up, nobody can really tell except for you. So, and you'll want the entire length of the thread because when I did it, I came pretty close to using all of it. And if you don't want to work with the entire length at the same time, you can always cut it close to in half and work with a smaller length because I know sometimes it gets a little tangled. So I'm just threading my needle with my last color. I'm going with green for this one to match my green fabric. Okay, so when you are ready and you've finished that last bit of stitching on the other side of our gap, we're going to fold down our fabric about 1/2 inch. So one of the easiest ways is kind of if you put 2 fingers in there, and where that first finger crease is, that'll be about 1/2 inch. And you can just kind of pinch and fold up.
When you say the back, when you're on the back side, you mean tying that knot on the back?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right, so now you're, all right, so I have, so this,
That looks good. You've got all your stitches. You finished up at the top. That's perfect. Okay, so now you'll take, I'm holding mine just folded the same way we have been, and I'm putting my fingers and kind of pulling taut at the sides. And just because we're going to fold it down about 1/2 inch. So then if you pinch it and flip, it'll give you about 1/2 inch. It does not have to be perfect. Could be more like 3/4. So once you have it folded down just a little bit, you don't want too much. Yeah, a little bit less than that if you can. So this is the hardest part. This will be tricky on a machine too. It's just one of those things when you're trying to finish the edges. It can get a little difficult. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. And we're going to fold again. This time we're using that end of the gap as our marker. So you can see I have my other stitches. They're covered up, and we have our gap where there are no stitches. We're going to fold. So you want to pinch right about where that gap ends. So about 1 inch down, and then flip again. We said this is the hardest part because that other layer that we just folded wants to kind of unroll. But when you fold it all the way down, so you have about 1 inch folded, and then you have our other edge folded in so that it's there's no raw edges facing out. So it's folded up 1/2 inch, and then again 1 more inch. And when you look on the side where our stitches are, you should actually already be able to see that opening, which is where we'll thread our yarn through. So that's part of why we had those.
oh, wow. Yeah.
Like I said, that's the trickiest part. It's the only thing that's not like self-explanatory.
Yeah, so like it's right here.
Exactly. And we're coming up close to the end of our time together. So this might be something that you end up finishing the last few stitches afterwards. But I do want to go ahead and start showing you. So we have, the only thing we want to make sure we do is that we don't stitch in the middle of that opening. Otherwise, we have all of this room to work with. I'll probably stitch pretty close to the edge of our fold because I want to make sure that that folded edge is closed down and nothing, those raw edges aren't peeking out. So you want to, this is the hard part. You're going to want to flip it. And this is where if you have an extra needle, there is 1 extra needle in your kit, but if you have anything else laying around, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and pin one side together just so it doesn't all come undone.
There's a safety pin in there too.
Yes, I was going to say you could use the safety pin and the needle. I'm always nervous putting needles in a plastic bag at the library because I'm like terrified that a child will accidentally grab a kit. And so you have your needle, and if you want to kind of put it close to that folded edge on one of the sides, so that it just holds it together a little bit while we're turning it right side out. You can definitely use the safety pin on the other side if you'd like. So I recommend that you use at least your extra needle to kind of hold it in place. And then just be careful, because next we're going to turn it right side out. So the same way you would if, you know, you were turning a sock that had gotten turned inside out in the laundry. We're flipping it. That needle should hold it mostly in place, and we'll adjust a little bit after we've turned it. Okay. So once you have it turned, it should look something like this. It's okay if the corners aren't turned all the way out, because that doesn't matter very much right now. You just want to make sure that you have your the unstitched edge visible, so that we know we're going to be able to thread our yarn through there. And then we're going to want to take whatever color thread you chose, and we're going to do the back stitch all the way around, kind of following those needle lines or pins. We're just wanting to make sure that we catch all edges so that it doesn't come undone. To start with the threading, you're actually going to go inside with your needle. And I'm going to start on the stitched edge because I think it just makes it a little bit easier. So you're going inside with your needle, and you're going to go up the same way we were doing with the back stitch when we did those seams on the inside. And you're going to want to go up pretty close to that seam and pretty close to that folded edge. So once you've pulled it all the way through, we're going to do the same thing we did with the next stitch. It's just a little bit trickier because now instead of working on a flat piece of fabric, we're working in a tube. So for mine, my stitches were not the neatest, but that's why we chose fabric and threads that are similar in color.
So at this point, the hole is on the inside, right?
Yes.
Okay. And we're not stitching over the hole.
Now we're stitching along that long folded edge about an inch down so that it'll
below the hole then.
Yes.
Oh.
So it'll seal it, and then I'll give you guys a few minutes to kind of at least get 1 or 2 stitches, and then I will show you actually using our little safety needle or safety pin, how you can thread that yarn through, because it is a pretty small hole. And one really easy way to kind of do the back stitch in the circular way is once you have your needle in the fabric from the right side, instead of pulling it all the way through and then going back up, you can just kind of push the needle through like that. So going down to make our back stitch, and then inserting just the tip of the needle to make our next stitch.
So we're going across the bag now?
Yes. And I'm going with 3 fingers inside our pouch just to make sure that I don't accidentally sew it closed. Before, not with this, but anytime with such
we're going full circle on this stuff.
Yes. Yes. So I don't know that we'll have time to finish this on camera together. But it's the same skill we've been practicing, which is that back stitch. And then of course, tying a knot when you get to the end. So instead of finishing at the top like we did, your stitches will come full circle and will end at that seam. And then, yeah, it's about 7:15. So I'll try to get us finished up in the next few minutes and show you guys how to finish this and answer any questions you have. When you get to those needles that we placed on the inside, when you're actually stitching alongside it, it's usually easier if you pull it because it'll kind of prevent you from being able to stitch in the curve. So as you can see, my stitches do not look perfect. Again, that's okay because nobody's going to notice. They're in a straight enough line and it's still closing our, I guess, the drawstring part. So once you have, once you were to have all of those stitches along the outside finished, you'll be able to take your string and you can actually use the little tiny safety pin, or if you have a larger one at home, a slightly larger one would probably be easier. And you're going to put the safety pin on the end of the yarn and close it. And now instead of trying to push a piece of yarn through a piece of fabric, we're instead using our little safety pin as the guide because it's much easier to feel where it's at. So I haven't finished my stitches, but I have it pinned with my extra needles, so it's close enough. And you'll be able to see what it looks like when it's completed. So you're going to take your safety pin and you're going to put it inside that unstitched loop. So that little opening. And you're pinching the safety pin and pulling. So if you have a slightly longer one at home, it would be a little bit easier, but this works perfectly. So I'm holding one end of the safety pin with my right hand and kind of pushing the fabric along with the other one. It's like a little shimmy. Almost through. When you get to the end, you just want to make sure that it pokes back out. And then you're able to, oops, there we go. My yarn got a little twisted in there. I think I might have. So my yarn looks a little weird because I think I accidentally caught one of the edges on the needle, so it's not pulling all of the thread pieces, which is fine because this is not what your finished product will look like. You will have nice stitches all the way around instead of extra pins. But once you have your yarn pulled all the way through, you can take that little safety pin out. And I recommend that you tie knots on the end so that it doesn't fray. It looks a little bit nicer on my sample one. And this will also help if you tie a large enough knot, since our opening for the thread is pretty small. You don't have to worry about losing that thread, like Christine was talking about at the beginning of our program, because that is one of the most frustrating things. But the good news is now you know the safety pin trick. I learned that in sewing class in high school. Makes it so much easier. So now ignore that loopy part. Yours won't look like that. But once you have it pulled through, you can kind of pinch at the sides and pull your string. And then you can leave it just like that, or you can tie a knot or a bow. And you have a drawstring bag. So like I said, it's the perfect size for a little pencil case, or I'll be using mine for sunglasses for sure. And now I want to take time to answer any questions or kind of show you anything over again. So you do have the skills to be able to finish this on your own if you're not quite done. You are just using the back stitch all the way around. And when you get to that other side and you see your stitches where they started, you're just going to tie a knot on the inside. And then you're using your small safety pin tied on or placed on the end of your yarn to be able to thread through the drawstring part. And I know we are over, it said the program was supposed to end at 7:15, so if anybody needs to log off, that's all right. I'll stay on for another few minutes and answer some questions. Thank you all for joining me this evening. And hopefully maybe at some point we can do sewing programs in person, maybe in a few months.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sydney. This is wonderful. It's just amazing to see you work.
Thank you.
Like, wow, you make things seem so easy and it's just so quick.
Definitely have to be so that I have time to show, because I know my sample one looks a lot neater and it took me a lot longer.
Can you show the sample again?
Yes. The sample, so you can see with this one, like my stitches along the top are much neater. And then on the inside as well, I put them a lot closer together. So you really, honestly, you can't really tell that this was hand stitched. My other ones, they're a little bit further apart, but that's okay because again, we're not making clothes here. This isn't something that's going to get stretched a lot.
Did you say you have stitch on the top? So it's not just the one loop around?
It is just the one loop.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I had, all right. So this is.
Yours is, yep. Yours is looking good.
Okay.
Should be.
Get it on the camera so you can see.
Get focused for a minute there. I'm going to say you've got it going around about an inch down, which is exactly what I did. Yeah, that looks.
Okay.
The blur background settings.
I think it's, yeah, it's a little more than an inch, but it's okay.
Yeah, this is a pretty simple project. If you're feeling ambitious, there are a lot more larger drawstring bag options out there. I know one of my coworkers, she really enjoys hand sewing because she finds it very relaxing and therapeutic. So she'll work on larger products. I'm a little more impatient and I know how quickly my sewing machine can get those stitches done, but there is something really satisfying about having done it with just your hands. And I will say, when you turn it right side out, if you want those corner edges to be a little bit neater, you can take a pencil or the edges of a scissors and kind of push them out because our fingers are still rounded, so they can't quite get it.
Now, when you get the yarn threaded through, like, are you supposed to tie it at the end?
Yes. So I have you can either just pull it tight and it will hold. Oh gosh, this one has come undone. Or you can tie like a little bow. I do recommend that you tie knots on the end just so it's a little bit easier to work with, and it also prevents it from slipping back into the back into that hole and getting lost, which you could easily refret it, but there's not really any need for that if you can prevent it.
All right, so it's all the way around.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And now I just have to get it threaded.
Were you able to tie a knot?
I'm trying that right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the hardest part is it's so tiny. Trying to get your hands inside the little like 3-inch diameter opening is a little difficult.
All right, so I got it tied. I'm gonna take the pin out. So it's pretty intact. I think
Yes.
it's got like you can see how the
Yep.
around that. So
Yes. No loose edges.
So this is what it looks like now.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm just trying to get the thread thing. So you said tie a knot in the yarn itself?
Once you have threaded it, you will want to tie knots on the end. You could tie a small one if it helped you get the safety pin secured. That might be a little bit easier than just putting it straight through the thread. You could do one small knot and then kind of pin it through the knot itself. You just don't want it to be big enough to where you can't get it back out the other end.
All right, so then I find the hole.
Mm-hmm.
And just squeeze it through. Okay, there's the hole. So now I just work it through like an inchworm.
Yep, exactly. I'm gonna say if you ever like if the elastic waistband ever gets shot and you want to like redo it, you can do this exact same thing and like open up the seam a little bit on the side and like pull the old elastic out and thread through a new one. The safety pin trick has saved many struggles.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, this is, it reminds me of last weekend when I was trying to get that cord back into the pants, you know, I was like, I had to get it right on target and to the point where it was gonna line up. All right, what just happened? I hit a roadblock here.
Oh.
Oh wait, that's the end. Oh, okay. Coming back through. I hope I didn't close it on myself. Oh no, what can I do? That wouldn't make sense, right? It wouldn't. It shouldn't be closed.
No, but there will be, so there'll be a little lip of fabric on the inside because we had that seam allowance, like the 1/2 inch along the edge. So it might be catching. So you'll just kind of have to wiggle it around until maybe even pull it back a little bit.
Sorry. Wait. Something's not right. No, there's got to be extra yarn hanging out, right?
Yes, you should have, once it's threaded through, there should be about 4 inches of yarn on either side of the fabric. I believe I think I cut a 12 or a 16-inch piece of yarn.
It's right there. I just don't know how to get it.
Do you think we should go ahead and wrap up the recording part? Because if it gets too long, I don't think that they'll be able to accept it. So I'm going to go ahead and start the recording. So, thanks everyone for coming, and we look forward to seeing you the next time for our next sewing project. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the recording part.
Yeah, that was wonderful.